like on wedding planning.
Yeah, that's what I said a long time ago.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
LOL.
balancing
A
wedding planning
tutorial.
and being a
Could
professional.
you
There you go.
imagine if like my expertise just like I cannot imagine taking questions.
Oh God. Like,
They're
what's
like,
out
where do you
there?
go wedding? They're like, where do you go wedding shopping? You're like, I don't know. I just went to this one place.
No, actually the venues we went to a lot. But I don't know if I like did the right thing or the best thing or whatever, but like definitely could do some talks on making it as simple as possible. You know, trying to make it as easy as possible. But
There you go. A deep dive into your experience. That's what you call it.
Okay, it seems like
yeah.
people are starting to join. I'm gonna switch myself to be a listener. If you guys see anything, just let me know.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Of course.
The Cool Bride podcast.
Oh my God, I can see it. The marketing assets with like the veil. Oh God, I would love it.
Maybe we should just do this for kicks.
Honestly,
It's
I
a
feel
big
like it would work.
industry.
Exactly. You know how you manage doing that and being a professional working. I can see it.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for listening to our fun facts at this beginning of our chat. We'll give it another 30 seconds, let people roll in, and then we are going to be off to the races. So just hang tight.
Yeah, amazing. And then Rachel, whenever you're ready, just let me know.
All right, I think we should be good.
Okay, perfect. So, hello, Fishbowl. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Samantha Legere, and I'm the marketing manager at the career coaching company Woken. Hi, Martha. Just keep your hand and your question. Right now.
Oh, you went on mute, Sam.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just saying, just hold that question for a second. We'll get to that later on. Thank you. Okay, so we're excited that this is our sixth time speaking on Fishbowl. So you can follow us by clicking our profiles to be notified of future conversations. But today we are kicking off our eighth session in our Career Living Room series, which focuses on different career topics so that you can get a holistic set of career guidance to ensure you can succeed. Uh, in this session, we'll review how to ace your interviews. So from preparation to forming replies to following up and more. I'll present and interview Rachel for about 40 minutes, and then we'll leave it open to the audience Q&A for about 20 minutes towards the end. For this, we welcome participation from the audience in two ways. So the first is by raising your hand to join the stage. You should see a button in the bottom right corner, but please make sure your microphone is enabled so we can hear you. Or two, you can direct message Rachel your question. We will keep your name anonymous. So now we're going to hear a quick a quick introduction into Rachel's background. So Rachel, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining. So, quickly, just to introduce myself, if we have not yet met, my background, I started out at Goldman Sachs, and from there, I went to Bridgewater Associates, where I was in recruiting and performance management. From there, I did career coaching training through NYU and got certified through the International Coach Federation. I've done coaching through a variety of organizations and have been building my own company for about 6 years. And we coach a wide variety of professionals on a wide variety of topics. I also did a tech MBA at NYU Stern. And yeah, that is the very, very quick background as to who I am. And happy to answer anything else on my background if that's helpful. And yeah.
Love it. Okay, so let's dive in. So as we know, your mindset is a key factor for interviewing well, but interviews can be nerve-wracking. So what advice would you give to those who are anxious?
Yes, yes, yes. Well, before I forget, I will just say I actually created a pre-interview meditation. So whether you take a look at our meditation or just any meditation, you want to figure out what are you going to do right before the interview and try to use every interview as like a practice because eventually you want to come up with a process that just works for you. Right? Like maybe you need to make sure you exercise that morning so that you're really focused or whatever it may be. Or maybe you need to listen to this hype up song or maybe you need to go for a walk. there's different things, and every single person is different. So what in your physical environment, what in your routine right before the interview or that day, where should you be, just any of those things, right? So getting to know yourself, and then honestly practicing, and we're going to talk so much today about that, but say you're in like full blown job search mode, you could take one interview question a day and just practice it out loud. And we're going to go really deep into how to succeed in interviews, but there's something weird about the practice out loud. And what it does is it's kind of like ingrained in your like biology, where it makes your body and mind more comfortable with the style of an interview question, because when you're not used to speaking in that way and then you get on the interview, your body goes into like fight or flight mode. So when you do it, say you practice for 5 minutes a day, you're getting used to the rhythm of like, what does it mean? What does it look like to think on my feet and to speak, quickly, or not quickly, but to speak in 1 or 2 minutes and to structure my thoughts. Interviews are hard because you're trying to be concise and also comprehensive. And so it's not like your everyday speech. You're sort of trying to communicate a little bit differently and think a little bit differently, right? So getting comfortable with how to structure your thoughts. What does it feel like in your body to speak for 60, 90, 120 seconds, 1 or 2 minutes? Like, what does that rhythm feel like? What is the pace? What is your tone? What is your energy? How are you approaching it? Are you having transition words? Are you jotting down some thoughts before you dive in? There's a lot of different tips and tricks, and we'll talk about those. But the whole point is getting in the rhythm of how you're going to handle it, how it's physically going to feel, and literally practicing it more often than not. Now, you're not practicing to memorize. You're practicing so that when you get to that moment, you're not like, this is an alien experience to me, but rather you're like, I know how this feels, and I can just focus on the words. I can focus on the message I want to get across, and not this like, oh, this structure feels so different. And I'm like, scaring myself because I've never, it's so different. It's so new. So the practice, right? And the routine, and what you're going to do that day, where you're going to be, what's sort of going to get you into that calm and centered mode. There are some exercises, that you can do right beforehand. I think that anxiety could, like, if we were to go deeper, the nerves can come from a lot of things. Sometimes we feel, a desperation of like, I need this job, and reminding yourself that you're going to be fine if you don't get it, right? Like, you want to come into the call from that sort of confident place. The other thing is sometimes people just worry talking about themselves and feeling confident to show who they are. So some of these things, like, I'll just say there's a lot of common reasons, but chatting with like a coach or a mentor or a peer to just really spend time understanding how you feel and why you feel that way and how to alleviate or overcome it, it may take a little bit of time. Like, you may not just resolve that feeling with, ripping off the band-aid. You want to work through, why am I not feeling confident, and how do I unravel that, and how do I build that confidence? And for all you know, there could be something subconscious that's driving that feeling. So take time to understand how you're feeling, and get support to like kind of, yeah, take the time to work through that. I'll pause there for now. There's obviously so much more we could go into with the mindset.
Oh my God, yeah. First question and so much good info already. But okay, so now let's talk about preparation. What should you research to prepare for an interview?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I think so many people just, look at your interviewer and their path and their background, and that's fine. But like, to be honest, I feel like that's just the cop out. Like, you want to look into, obviously, the company. You want to look into the job description. So there's a few core components, right? So obviously read the entire company website. Um, Read the entire job description. Personally, I like to take handwritten notes. And then you want to also just like do a little Google of like, how is this company showing up in the news? Beyond the research, of course, your prep is also how you're going to answer common questions and then what you're going to ask them. So those are just some of the high level like core buckets of like what you're going to research. Once you start doing the reading and taking notes, you're naturally going to come up with good questions. I would see what questions arise when you're doing that reading and that research, because those are going to be the best, most strategic questions. Sometimes when you sit there and say, like, force yourself to say, what should I ask? It's almost like to like check the box. But if you're like naturally doing the learning about what is this role? What is this team? What is this department? What is this company? What is the industry? What is their positioning? What is their strategy? What are their goals? You're reading and you're learning about that kind of stuff. You're naturally going to come up with like really, 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 natural questions and good questions that are genuinely on your mind. So yeah, reading all those key materials. And then, again, your prep is also how you're going to think of stories and past examples and how you're going to answer those common questions, and practicing those out loud. When you think about the job description, with every bullet on the JD, you can really think about it in two ways. One, think of at least one past story or project or example of when you did that thing before. And two would be like conceptually. So if they were to say, how do you think about, developing or this process or developing this strategy, it could be a little more like, what are the key factors on your mind? What do you keep in mind, or how do you generally do it, versus telling an example or a story? So when you think about each point of the JD, you can sort of think about it in those two ways. That's kind of my quick answer on like what to look at and what to look into. I think it totally depends. That's more like a first round interview, right? So if you're going deeper into later rounds, if you have a technical interview, you may have different forms of prep depending on where you are in the process. But that's kind of like the basics.
Love it. Okay, so next question. What are some common frameworks for applying to interview questions? Like, we've heard a lot about the STAR framework. Can you explain it? Is there any more? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So the STAR framework, if you guys haven't heard of that, right? So STAR means situation, task, action, and result. And if you're ever telling a story, that's a great, very clear way to tell the logical story. Situation basically means remind them, which role and which organization were you at when this story happened. It's a great moment to like drive home if you were in a role title that's similar to what you're going after. It's a great moment to be like, when I was a marketing manager at yada yada yada, whatever organization. You remind them that like you've done that thing before. So just remind them your role, your organization. The task really means like, what was the goal, what was the problem, what were you sort of working towards. And then the A is the action. So this is really, what were the several different steps or the process that you took to either achieve that goal or resolve that problem. And then the R is the results, the outcomes, the metrics. How did it go in the end? I will add a little bit to the STAR framework. Before you dive into the story, you might also give a little context, because sometimes when you tell one story, it misses like, but how many times have you done that? And if it's something you've done multiple times, you could say, well, for the last several years, I've done this type of project several times. I'd be happy to give you one example of that, right? So something like that, even if it's a quick anecdotal, it still shows them like, how much is this part of your wheelhouse, right? If you can tell them you've done it more, then great. And then the last part of STAR, you can say the results, and then at the very end, you can sometimes add the learnings. And that's kind of a fun way to say, like, did you come away with that, from that story, and you would have done it some better and different way next time, or is there any context to add to that? If you're telling a story that's slightly different than what it is they asked you, of course, tell your most relevant story, and then, say in your situation, A, B, C, and D would be a little different, right? Just to show that you understand how it's applicable, but also how you would be nimble if the situation were different, right? So that's just one framework. Right. And so Sam asked about different frameworks. The key to interviews, in my opinion, is trying to structure your thoughts. And so if you're not telling a story, you just want to ask yourself, what is the structure that I can give here? How can I bucket my thoughts? How can I compartmentalize? Because usually with any given question or answer, maybe there's a few key pieces or a few key elements. So a structure could be like a process. A structure could be, there's local, regional, national, international. That's a framework. Or you could just say, well, there's three main things: first, second, third, right? You could just break it up into parts. But giving some structure helps people to know where you are and just know how to follow you versus like, essentially, if you're thinking while you're speaking, right, they can, of course, try to follow you. But what you really want to do, like if you have a piece of paper in front of you, you kind of want to pause before you dive into any answer and say, oh, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. And then you may write down one or two or three keywords. And each of those keywords on your paper is representing a key idea that you want to get across. Their goal is to hear that you understand enough of the key factors that they can trust you to operate independently. So you really want to show that comprehensive nature of your thoughts. And so when you write down a few key words to begin with, you'd be surprised what your brain can do in 1 or 2 or 3 seconds. And just thinking of what are those key ideas that I want to make sure I get across? What are the key factors that are most important based on what they're asking me? And so write down a few thoughts, right? And or you can even start writing as they're asking you a question. They may be rambling and then you start to think as they're talking. Um, and so that's kind of how to think about structure, how to think about a framework. And just using transition words will remind you of like to incorporate some structure. Another way to think about structure is just, have a period at the end of your sentence, take a breath, and start a new sentence, start a new idea. Like a lot of us just have this like long, stringing, winding thought. But it's like, all right, well, first I would think about, give your idea. Next, I would think about, and you're going to explain why. Lastly, I would think about, so a few keywords will give them that anchor of like boom, boom, boom. And the cool part is on the listener side, when you use that structure, they sort of come away being like, oh, wow. It almost just feels more like wrapped up with a bow in this like comprehensive way because you were like, saying 2 or 3 or 4 components or factors or whatever. And it's like, great. They come away being like, wow, that was a lot, and they can understand it and digest it a little bit more easily, right?
That's so true. It's like you're making it easy for them to understand, which of
That's
course
it.
we love.
Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so next question. How would you introduce yourself in an interview, or what tips do you have for an elevator pitch?
Yes. So I like to use what I call my professional summary because it's really straightforward and just sort of simple. And so the way I structure that is what I call the background, strengths, and then direction. And what's great about this, by the way, is you can write this down. Now, I would never want you to read notes during the interview, by the way. You're going to put all your notes and prep away because when you're in the moment, you want to be in the moment. And they're going to know if you're reading notes. So you can write down your summary before and in order to prep and figure out what you want to say. And then of all the questions, like your elevator pitch is something you can like sort of memorize, but the art is like it needs to sound natural still every time. So still have that energy and tone as if it's the first time you're saying it. But yeah, so background, I guess I can give you like a bit of maybe I'll make up an example right now just so you guys can like hear my professional summary. But just know that I'm sort of making this up. Okay, so first you give yourself like a title. So you could say something like, I'm a talent development professional with expertise in performance management, career coaching, product management, and hiring and recruiting across a few key industries such as financial services, ed tech, and healthcare. My strengths are in coaching individuals, to support them with a variety of their goals and challenges, and make sure they, see results in the end of their program. And my direction is that I am motivated to develop tools and frameworks to help employees and individuals develop to their potential, which could be a talent manager role. In a variety of industries. So I sort of just made that up really fast on the spot. But you can see background, right? Give yourself a title, a few key areas of functional expertise, industries of exposure, strengths, what you're special at, what you're great at, what you're natural at, why you're so great at it, and then direction. What are you motivated to do next and why? Some people trip up on the direction and they start to say, here's why I'm interested in your role. The reason I don't like to do that is because when you introduce yourself, like, who are you is independent from why are you there in that conversation today. They may later ask you, why are you a fit, or why are you interested in this role, or why are you interested in this company, or what are you looking for next in your career? Where do you want to go in your future? Those are all separate questions. But when you're doing an introduction, there's such a beautiful moment where they can hear that click between what you're motivated to do and what it is they're looking for. So instead of saying, here's why I'm here today, just tell them like what work is interesting or motivating to you next, because it's a moment for them to really see that authentic sort of believability of like, you're in the right place and this could be a good fit, right? So if you're speaking about your own true direction and motivation. Yeah, that's kind of how to do the elevator pitch. I mean, if you have some special something in terms of a past client, a success metric, some education, some specific thing that you really want to call out, you can always squeeze things in there. But again, it's got to be short, right? So give yourself a framework, right? Background, strengths, direction is a good framework. If you want to add to it or adapt it, you can. If there's something specific you really want to call out, but again, work this out on paper for this type of question because you're going to get it. And by the way, this is different than somebody saying, walk me through your journey, walk me through your background, walk me through your resume. That's more of like the journey story type thing where you go through sort of each role and why you went to the next role. But tell me about yourself is different. It's really an intro, it's an icebreaker, it's an overview, right? So I think people trip up in the tell me about yourself because they try to say, oh, I was here and then I was here. And it's like, what if you just had to synthesize like who you are overall, encompassing all the different things that you've done and your areas of expertise, right? That's different than them wanting to hear every step of the way.
I love how you like contrasted those two because I feel like I constantly trip up on that. So it's good to hear. Okay, so next question. And these are actually some of the most difficult ones too. So it's because a lot of times interviewers will ask tricky questions, and I would love to hear your advice on answering some of these. So the first one is, what is your biggest weakness? So Rachel, how would you answer that?
So first and foremost, I think people struggle here for a few reasons. Sometimes we take these interview questions and we're like in a vacuum and we're trying to like come up with the answers of like how are we going to say it to someone else. But the first step of the process is to actually ask yourself the question, meaning you need to know yourself and you need to build that self-awareness and you need to reflect, because if it's not an authentic answer, they are going to smell it and sniff it. They need to know that you are a self-aware person, that you're honest, that you're willing to be open about something that gets in your way, because no one's perfect, and that you have that guardrail in place, that you have some process or way of making sure that that weakness doesn't actually impact your work. No one's perfect, but there's ways that we can get creative or get support or improve that skill or whatever it may be. So step one, be honest with yourself and try to reflect. Think about past performance reviews, past feedback, past challenges. And if you're not sure, work with a coach, mentor, peer, or even go to a past colleague to try to figure out what the real answer is. You don't need to say two weaknesses. You just need to pick one, but I would pick the one that like is actually your weakness. Secondarily, you will think about, okay, there's different ways of phrasing this, right? So you don't need to use language that's very kind of red flag language. You can, and you're not going to sugarcoat it either. You need to be clear enough that you're being honest. But again, there's different ways to say the same thing. And so, yeah, that's kind of how to do it. You're going to sort of reflect. You're going to think about what the honest answer is. You're going to explain what that weakness is, maybe a little bit of how, when, why, where it shows up so that they can understand what you're saying. And then you tell them not just how you're improving the skill, but how you guardrail yourself. So like get really specific. If you don't give them a specific thing that you do, then they're going to know that like you actually don't do anything about it, right? So it cannot be something vague. So for example, okay, maybe I'm not good with time management. So, what I do is at the beginning of every day, I look at my top 3 priorities. I go to my calendar, I time box it out so that I make sure those are the first 3 things I do. And that way, in the afternoon, if I have extra time, I get to my other priorities. I just made that up, but like it's specific. It's a process. It's real. It's practical. You can picture me doing that. It's tangible. Sometimes people are like, yeah, sometimes I meet with a mentor and I learn how other people do it. Like, no. What do you physically do, right? What is a specific thing you do in an everyday fashion that helps you get around that thing, right? Or get support or just what I like to call guardrail yourself, right? So that's just an example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the specifics and like giving the example really, really helps all of us understand it. So I love that. Okay, so next question we're commonly asked is, tell me about a time where you made a mistake and how did you handle it? So interested to hear your answer.
Yeah. Um, again, here you're going to be honest. I think the key is probably the STAR framework because it's still a story, right? So anytime you're telling a story, make it as easy for somebody to follow the story, tell the STAR framework. I think the key things about mistakes are showing that you, like on the back of it, you had process improvement. So how did you improve this for the future so that it wouldn't happen again? And maybe you did something for your own self to prevent it from happening, or maybe there was a team-wide process you put in place so that no one would face that in addition to yourself, right? Processes can be great to help you or help others to prevent things in the future. The other thing is the integrity. Like, did you speak up? Like, what if you sent a report that had the wrong data and somebody already, used it in a meeting? Would you circle back to the right stakeholders, send the updated data, tell them exactly what changed, and make sure that it didn't have any risks if people were making decisions based on that, right? And then, of course, always that process improvement. But I think it's a key about integrity, that you're being prompt, that you're willing to kind of fix it and speak up, because we'd all prefer the honesty, right? And preventing any business risk as soon as we can. So that's what I think they're really looking for in that, is that you're open, right? Because we all make mistakes, but how do you handle it? Are you nervous to speak up? Did it take you a week? How quickly did you do it? Who did you go to? How was your approach? um Things like that, just showing that you're willing to move quickly, that you know how to go to the right people, check on kind of the impact, improve it for the future. Those are just a few things I would think about. With every question, think about, what are they really looking for? They're looking for some trait as to like who you are and how do you operate and what do you value. And the storytelling is going to show versus tell that those values. So in your story, hopefully it shows that you're like, willing to take action, willing to be honest, that you're prompt, whatever it may be, right? So you can ask yourself, what do I think they're looking for in this, question?
Love it. Okay, so next question, and this one just, it's always so broad, which is why I think a lot of people struggle with it. And that is, why should we hire you? What is unique about you?
Yeah. So what's interesting is the order of questions, because they may say, what are your strengths? They may say, why are you a fit for this role? Why are you interested in the role? Why should we hire you? Like all of these are like sort of variations um on the same thing. So you have to know, like, did they already ask me the strengths and now they're asking me something that's like adjacent and similar? Because why should we hire you? Like maybe you refer back to the fact that you already explained your top 3 strengths, right? So you may need to refer to something you've already said, or if you haven't explained your strengths, then why should we hire you? Like you of course want to show your fit with the role, your fit with the responsibilities, your alignment, your ability to drive value quickly because you are aligned. I mean, the core, fit for role, but then also, of course, interest in the company, their industry, their mission, their impact, right? Could be a second component. So it's a combination of experience, fit, skills, value, but also interest. And again, it does refer, whatever they already ask you. You either refer to that or you start from the basics. I think the key with, if you're talking about their company and their industry specifically, you just want to show like authenticity, right? Because some companies are like, it's a big company, it's a reputable company, like of course anybody would want to work there. So show that, like, why do you specifically have an interest in it? um and show that you've done your homework. Like, did you ever research or learn something about them that's not just like an obvious fact? Like, go deeper. Do they do some like social impact thing or philanthropy thing or who knows what they do, right? What's the day-to-day like with their employees, the culture? Maybe they do something special. Right. So that's kind of like interest in what they do and showing that you've done your homework, but then also, fit with the key responsibilities. And so when you're showing fit, you're basically aligning your own strengths and self awareness about yourself with your understanding of what this role is. Right. And so here's where you may have structure, because they may say, why should we hire you? And you would say, here's where you think about a few things. So you may say, well, there's a few reasons. First is my strong alignment with the role. Second is my alignment with your company mission and product and the impact you have. And the third is the alignment with the company culture. And I just made that up. You might have other reasons, but just like, this is what I mean by coming up with a framework. What are the core reasons? And then you can dive into it, right? And the beauty of interview prep, by the way, is you kind of just have to memorize those core ideas. When you explain each one in the moment, it can be different every time. But what you're doing in your prep is asking yourself, all right, what would be the 3 reasons? Right? Making sure you think about that. Um, and it's going to go a long way to show that you've already thought about it, right? And that you can sort of just drum up those reasons. Does that make sense?
Yes, lovely. Okay, and next question. This is, why did you leave your last job? And specifically on this, what would you advise those who left because of a negative experience? How should they
Mm.
handle this?
So it depends why you left, obviously, right? Like, if it was a broader layoff, it's a little easier, I guess I'll say, to talk about because it was a broader exercise or a broader situation. And of course, you can talk about that. If it was like a negative situation, a few things. One, practice with another person so they can hear how you describe it. You want to see if your emotion is coming through. You want to see the tone. You want to see what keywords you come out of your mouth, because sticky situations are normal and common in the workplace. But there's always 2 sides to the story. So you just want to make sure you're not coming across like blaming anything. And another way to do it is talk about what you're looking more for. So you could say, I'm really looking for a company culture that has a little bit more of, A, B, and C, and whatever the traits are. Essentially, if you're looking for more of something, it implies that your past didn't have that. That's kind of like a nice way of explaining like a situation of what you were lacking. Um, and by the way, the other thing you could say, maybe you're looking for a different type of role or a different type of work or different type of industry. Like, it's a slightly a cop out, but like, you can always say like, I was seeking more of A, B, C, and D, and maybe there's a lot of things you're seeking, and that's forward looking and it's positive and it's true. Um, if you wanted to explain something where there was an issue, you really just need to practice that with somebody listening, because you just want to make sure that it doesn't sound like you're blaming somebody. But there are delicate, polite, professional ways to be honest about a difficult situation. It's hard to say without using a specific example. um, but I would just kind of work with somebody to workshop it, because you don't want to sound so vague that like it's not even making sense, but you don't want to use like words that are how you might describe it to a friend, right? If you were to like truly tell them what happened, you know what I'm saying? So like somewhere in the middle. So just workshop that out loud. And if anybody has an example, and when we get to the Q&A, you're welcome to give me one and I can tell you how I might phrase that. But it really just depends on what the reason was and how you can sort of get your point across, get your message across without sounding too, negative, right? Again, you're being brief as well, I would say. Um, I think less is more in this answer. So you might give your reason and then you might quickly lean into all the things you're excited to do and what you're looking for next, right? Because when you explain what you're looking for next, it implies what you were missing, but it also implies what values align with you and what your values are, right? So I think that's kind of a delicate way to handle it.
Awesome. Okay, and now what should you do if an interviewer asks about a gap in employment?
hmm I mean, it depends, right? Because the gap may be the same, like why did you leave, right? So a gap could mean you were just job searching, a gap could mean you were doing something personal. It depends if there's context that you want to share as to what was going on, but usually it's like, connected to why you left. um you could say there was personal things that, personal responsibilities. Maybe you were choosing to take a little time. Maybe you were traveling. Like maybe you were exploring and clarifying your next steps. You could say a combination of things. Like maybe there was one or two or three reasons that of like if you chose to take some time. Um, you could also just say, I was, being really thorough in terms of figuring out where I wanted to go next. If you were truly just sort of sitting there job searching, I would probably just say, A, why you left, and then B, like I was taking my time to build my network, meet people, understand what was out there, figuring out what I wanted, and just making sure I was taking the right opportunity, right? But yeah, usually it's tied to why did you leave in the first place? And then if you have any personal reasons, if you want to share, you don't have to share specifics, but you could say I had some family obligations or whatever it may be. If that's the case, that's okay to give. They just want to see like some level of logical reasons, right? And even if the job search took you a long time too, it's okay to say I was, pursuing and exploring my next steps and, meeting different people and researching where I wanted to go next. It depends what the true answer is, but I think it's okay to be honest. I think it's okay to talk about the few different things you had going on. Maybe you were pursuing some upskilling. It really depends. But, I think largely being honest, and again, you can be brief. You don't need to tell them every little minutia. You could say I had family obligations, right? Like that's a very quick way. They don't have to know every detail. And for all they know, and it's up to you. Like if you truly had something that took up a lot of your time that was personal, again, you don't have to give the detail, but you could say, I had a family obligation that required a fair amount of my time and commitment, which, first of all, shows that you're a good person. But B, it shows that you were tied up. There was something that really took you away from the job search. And that's okay. But it shows that, it was a time consuming thing for you, which is okay. So it just depends. It depends what was going on, right?
Yeah, totally. I agree. Okay, and then right before we get into the Q&A, one last question here. In general, what should you do if you can't think of an answer to a question?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I like to always think of your most possible relevant answer, right? So, like, ideally, you try to think of a story of when you've done that thing before or something similar, or you just try to give your like process based answer of like what is your knowledge of that thing. Sometimes we've seen a project get done on another team where we were just on the meetings and we were listening and we got exposure to that thing and we could sort of say what other people did. I mean, your knowledge of how something works or how something should work, or you saw another team do something, like you want to give as much relevant information as humanly possible. Your knowledge, your exposure, whatever that may be. Or how would you go get trained up? How would you go learn how to do that thing? Maybe you know where the resources are and you know the steps you would take to build that thing out. That could also go a long way. Your knowledge of like key factors of a certain area is really will go that long way, right? Because it will show them that like you know enough of what to look for. What else? Those are just some of my quick thoughts on, if you can't think of something. But um, I would obviously try to do your best where you're not like, there's a difference between, oh, I don't have an answer that's super relevant and we just use some of the examples that I just mentioned, or there's a difference between like, I'm literally stuck, I'm blanking, and I physically cannot think of anything, which in that case, honestly, I would just do a lot of mock practice, whether it's a peer, coach, a mentor, or somebody, because that means getting more comfortable with how to think on your feet. And what you can actually do is, say you were to have somebody ask you, when you're prepping on your own, you can ask yourself interview questions, but you can also incorporate a question that you had never prepared before. So, like, you Google a question and it's something you've never asked yourself before and you just try to answer it right then and there. So like getting in the habit of either asking yourself or having somebody else ask you something that you have not prepared, so you get in the rhythm of, how can I think on my feet, right? Because that's part of the skill, right? So I would just get more comfortable with how to do that.
Yeah, definitely thinking on your feet. Okay, so we're going to put a pause in our questions as we're hitting the 40-minute mark. So thank you for all the advice, Rachel. This is just a snippet of what Sheen Woken can help you with. So before we open it up to the audience for Q&A, Rachel, can you tell us one more time about what Woken does in case anyone would like more assistance?
Yes, so we provide coaching sessions, and of course, we've got our website and we've got a software platform. But we really are helping individuals with all kinds of career goals, whether you're clarifying your path, debating upskilling opportunities, improving your networking, personal branding, job searching, interviewing, or even just advancing on the job. We are here for all the things to serve as your co-pilot, and make sure you're being thoughtful and supported and intentional with all of your career steps and career decisions, and really realizing the growth that you want and having support all the way through. So that's the quick snippet. But yeah, feel free to get in touch, and we'll make sure you have all of our links and information at the end. But yeah, please feel free to raise your hand if there's anything we can answer. And I think we have some other continued questions. If no one has a question, we can of course keep going. But please, at this moment, for the next 18 or so minutes, if you do have a question, you can totally raise your hand, or you can DM me as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, to raise your hand, you should see a button in the bottom right corner. But please make sure your microphone is enabled so we can hear you. Or you can DM Rachel, and that will be kept anonymous. So you can do any one of those two options. We would love to answer your questions. Just to keep going for right now, you've already kind of mentioned questions you can ask, but like, can you get more specific on like some of your favorites?
Oh, questions to ask the interviewer?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
recruiter.
Okay. So I feel like there's two kinds of questions. There's questions that sort of prove your fit and your knowledge. And then there's questions that actually help you sort of get the answers that you really need. I like in the first one or two or three interviews to really lead with the questions that actually prove your knowledge. And so I can give you some examples, but to be honest, if you're interviewing for an engineering role or a marketing role or whatever the thing is, you want to use your knowledge of the work to come up with questions, right? So if you're in customer success or whatever the job is, like, what are the actual topics or challenges within that role, within that team, within that function, where you can almost prove that you know how to think about the right things? You know what I'm saying, right? So you want to get to that specific level. But, general buckets, you can always think about asking about their strategy, their goals, their
Hmm.
roadmap, their pain points, sort of, how are things going? How work is assigned or divided. Broadly more about the company, the positioning, the differentiation and the competition, things like that. Any key changes on the team in the recent past or upcoming in the future. These are just a few of sort of the generic ones, but really you want to think as authentically as possible, because when you have a question that comes across like you really did your homework, it's going to be so much more clear that you've been like actually thinking about this role seriously. And so you really want to sit there and almost like picture yourself on the job. Like, what would you be caring to know if you had to do this job well? Do you want to ask about resources, processes, tools, what's succeeding, what's failing? Are they held to certain metrics or KPIs? Where does the team stand? get your mindset in like, what if I was sitting there doing this all day, every day? What would I need to know if I would succeed in this job? You know what I'm saying? And so get really specific and it'll show that you're taking it really seriously. Towards the end of the process, yeah, sure. Some work-life balance or things like that. You want to make sure you understand, how flexible it would be or it's a little hard with flexibility because you don't want to give this impression of like, I'm not going to work. But the other thing I will say is like around the culture, instead of just saying, what's the culture, make sure you are thinking about like what traits of a culture you value. So, for example, and then you can ask them about like a story. So, they ask you, tell me about a time. You can actually ask them something similar. So, let them show versus tell. If you say, what's the culture? They're going to say all these positive things. How do you even know if that's true? So, say, like for me, I like to be empowered in my workplace to come up with new ideas. Say you say to them, tell me about the last time someone on the team had a suggestion or process improvement and how did that go? They may say, like, yeah, Jane had this idea and she's running with it and she just proposed it yesterday. Or they may say, we review all the ideas once a year and we budget for one of them to make, whatever. Or they may say, somewhere in the middle, once a month at the team meeting, yada, yada. I mean, I'm making it up. But when they give you their process or a story or the frequency or how does this really work for them, then you can interpret, is that an empowering environment or not? Right? So you want to analyze, you want to get your own insights and your own interpretation based on stories, right? So that's how I would do like culture questions. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, I was just like taking notes as you were saying that because there's so many questions that I'd never thought of before. And especially the culture, you're right. Like if you ask people that, they're just gonna be like, oh yeah, it's great. Like, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like, how do you know? Okay, so yeah, next question. What should you do if you were offered a position during the interview, but you aren't sure whether to accept? Sometimes you feel pressured. So how would you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably never accept anything over the phone. You can always, you can sound positive and excited and you can be like, "Oh, wow, that's so great. Would you mind sending me some information on email and I can review that over and, get back to you once I take a look or if I have any questions. This is really exciting." Like you can say positive things. You just don't need to say ever like yes. I think it's very rare that like a reputable company would like expect you to say yes right then and there. So if you're ever asked something like that, I would just take your time and it never hurts for you to say like send me over something, right? Um yeah, that's kind of my quick thoughts, but let me know if I'm missing something in your mind.
No, yeah, I think that's a lesson I learned the hard way, being pressured into it. So I love that. Okay, so now how should you reflect after an interview? Like, what questions should you ask yourself?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great one. I believe on our website, we have about 25, we have like a downloadable 25 questions to ask yourself after the interview. And what's funny about that list is you could ask yourself those questions before the interview. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of reverse engineering. What do I have to think about to succeed? But of course, you can also do it after. And there's so many ways to think about it. What went well? What didn't go well? How did I feel? What can I have done better? Document questions you had never heard before. Document questions that tripped you up. Um, anything that really stands out to you, to be honest, are good, valid reflections to take note of and see what you can do with for the future. Do you want to adapt your routine for how to lead in if you were nervous? Like, do you need to, do something different next time in the few minutes before the call? Um, you know um yeah, just how you answered certain things. Where did you stumble? Thinking about your speech. Were you speaking too fast? Your tone, your volume, your pace. um what else? The length of how long you're speaking, things like that, right? Was there something you didn't hit on? Did you hit on the most important things, the most relevant projects, to get your point across, right? Those are just some of the things, but I would take a look at what we have on our website because it's probably a little more robust than what I'm thinking at the top of my head right now. and there's a lot of ways to diagnose it, because it's, of course, how do you feel? um but your gut reactions sometimes are the best to take note of. I did get a question in the DM. So it says, how long should the answer to each star question be? So, I would say the answer to any interview question should be like 1 to 2 minutes. And if you're not sure how long you're talking, obviously you can time yourself, but practice with like a peer, a mentor, a coach, because to be honest, you're not going to time yourself in the moment. So of course you can time yourself in your prep to get in the rhythm of it, but you really do want to get into the moment of like knowing, like you want in your body, like to know, like what does it feel like when I'm talking too long, and like what does it feel like to talk too short of an answer. And that way, it is hard to like pace yourself. It is hard to figure out like how high level do I go, or how detailed do I go with a story, so that it's not too short and not too long. That takes practice to know how to approach your answer in a way that will be the right level of detail and the right length. Also, using those transition words will help a lot. Because if you say, well, the situation was da, 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 the task at hand was da, 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 in terms of the action steps. And by the way, I'm obviously going very fast, but when you use transition words, it really helps you to have each core point and have an anchor, because there's really 4 core components. It doesn't mean each of the 4 elements of star have to be equal in length. But yeah, you really want to practice, and you're going to get in the rhythm of knowing how long is too long. And so, yeah, you want to get to that point of like where you get comfortable with. I mean, that's the art. That's why we're having this chat, because it is hard to interview. It is hard to know how to only speak for that long. You don't want to be too long-winded where they're starting to drift off. And so it takes practice to get to that point of knowing.
Oh, definitely. That's some really good information. We hope that helped. So once again, if anyone else has questions, feel free to raise your hand or DM Rachel anonymously, and she'll answer just as she did right now. Um, okay, so we only have about 8 minutes left, so we're just gonna do some more quick questions before we wrap up. Okay, so now what advice would you give to those who come out of an interview feeling like they didn't ace it? So how do you analyze where you went wrong?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think your gut reactions are really gonna help. Like genuinely, I would trust your self-aware. Like if you're stuck and you're like, I don't know where I went wrong, that is different. And of course, you can go to a coach and a mentor and a peer and sort of talk it out and try to diagnose it. But I really would try to lean into your self-awareness, right? Like, were you talking too long? Did you not get your points across? Things like that, right? So what do you think happened? Right? What do you think you need to work on? And then, of course, if you get a rejection, I do think it's okay to send an email and say, I'd love to learn for my own personal growth. Do you have 5 minutes to hop on a call? I'd love to understand where I could improve in terms of, whether it was my skill and, my alignment for the role and my fit for the role. What was it? My communication, in the interview itself? Was it something about culture fit? Are you open to a quick chat today, or tomorrow? Would be so grateful for anything you could share. Sometimes people don't always do that, but of course you can always try. And when you make it like you're really grateful, you're only asking them for 5 minutes, and honestly, putting a mini little agenda, like was it A, B, C, or D? You're not asking them to answer that right then and there, but you're showing that like on this call itself, you're willing and open to be specific about where it was. So writing a good email to like try to drive that feedback. What else? Yeah, and to be honest, having somebody else listen to you, even if it's just a peer, whoever it may be, is honestly huge, because it's like having somebody look at your resume. Like you don't know how it reads, how it looks, how it sounds until somebody tells you their perception. So the same with interviews. Like maybe you think you're telling a story that's clear, and maybe it's just not clear at all. Like a lot of us trip up because we may talk in this like internal jargon. Like we may use words from a our job that someone doesn't know what we're saying. Like, are you giving context? Like, telling a story, especially if it was like some big project that took a long time and you have to tell that story in 1 or 2 minutes, like, not always easy to do. So recognize that it's worth your time to practice, have somebody else listen, give you those thoughts and feedback. And of course, when you have a listener, tone, pace, volume, energy, as well as clarity of your message. Um, but it depends. If you're seeing trouble with your interviewing, you want to notice patterns. If you're constantly getting interviews but no offers, it either means you're going to need more mock interviews, or is it the right role fit for you? Are you seeing any patterns? Or maybe every role, it was some different thing. Maybe one role they have an internal candidate, maybe some role was something else. So sometimes there's no pattern, but just trying to diagnose for each situation, what was it? And if there is a pattern, that's going to tell you where you need more support. But if you're struggling to just land first round interviews, that more so means like getting your foot in the door and networking and understanding how to like really get to the top of the funnel. So it depends. Notice if you're seeing any patterns, and that's going to help you figure out where you need support.
So true. Okay, so now what are your thoughts on thank you notes? When should you send one? What do you include in it? Any other tips you have there?
So thank you notes definitely like within 24 hours, but ideally less than that. And by the way, you can send a follow-up, about a week later as well. You should stay warm. You should stay top of mind, reiterate fit and interest. But in the thank you note, like try to be specific about what you guys spoke about in the call. Try to reiterate why it aligns with you. Maybe you learned, something about the role or the team, and be as creative and specific as you can to make it a value added moment and leverage the opportunity in the fact that you get a moment to write to them something. And you can really add a lot of value. I mean, if you ever did you might have something to add, something you missed in the interview that you thought of that you can add. You might have written a blog or done some work that you wanted to hyperlink and show them. There's a lot of ways to keep it sort of, concise, and yet make it a value added opportunity, right? So, of course, reference what you guys spoke about, reiterate fit and interest, let them know you're excited for the next steps. And then again, follow ups, great opportunity to leverage. Um, Showing that you're prompt and persistent, showing that you can write a great email, showing, it's staying top of mind, being specific in your follow up. Instead of saying, do you have any updates? Ask about the next steps, ask if they have feedback, ask if they have follow up questions, ask what the rest of the process looks like, right? So you want to add value, but you also want to like make it a question that they actually want to answer. Is there any way to I got a DM. Is there any way to reference your notes when an interviewer asks a question while still being professional? If you glance at a notepad or if you glance at a resume, like maybe, but you have to know yourself and practice to see if that quick glance is actually going to help you in any way. And try doing it without glancing at any notes, because personally, I find it's usually distracting, and it's way better to be present and mindful in the moment. They can feel that even if it's a phone call or even if it's a video call. And trusting yourself, knowing that all the prep you did before that was more than sufficient. Your ability to think well and dynamically and strategically in the moment without looking at anything. I personally think you're going to actually think better when you have nothing to look at personally, because you're just focused on your best thoughts and your best communication. But know yourself and know your process. If you feel like glancing actually helps you, you could, but I would just be very careful, because if they see that you're reading or anything like that, I don't love that. So you might want to just practice with someone on the other end of your Zoom just to see like their reaction and like how it looks if you do that. So I would just try it and see how that goes, because I'd always err on the side of just having you be in the moment. I know you want your clutch, your notes there, but I would, the other thing too, by the way, when you're practicing, practice with your notes, but then practice without your notes. So get comfortable doing it that way too. And then when you get in the moment, it's going to feel like your practice, right? So you want to do the practice in the way that most mimics the real thing.
Awesome. Okay, so we hope that helped. Since we only have about a minute left, we're going to wrap up and share where you can find us. So you can contact. Sorry, did I mute myself again?
Yeah, you're good
Yeah,
now.
you can connect with me on LinkedIn by searching Samantha Legere. And Rachel, where can people connect with you in Woken?
Yes, so our website is iamwoken.com. We have a ton of free resources on there, and we always offer a free initial call as well. On LinkedIn, I'm Rachel Surwitz, and I'm always all over LinkedIn. So please send me a DM or a message, or if you have any follow up questions. And on socials, we are usually either at Woken or at Get Woken. So please follow us, reach out. If you sign up on our emails, we usually only do like a monthly email, and we usually do 1 or 2 or 3 free events a month. So if you want more of this type of content, we are here. We are here to help. So please find us, please reach out, and know that we're here to support you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please follow us on Fishbowl. You can click our profiles and be notified of some of those future events. In fact, I think we have one coming up on January 16th. So, Rachel, if you want to quickly tell everyone what it's about, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, so in Q1, we have a series where we're going to bring in some recruiters and do some talks on kind of behind the curtain recruiting workflows and how to use that information to your advantage in your search. So stay tuned, and we will be back in January.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We hope this helped, and happy holidays.
All right, bye everyone.